So thank you for coming today. This is going to be a multi-part series, so if you can't come to all of them, that's totally fine. It's either going to be 2 or 3. The reason I say that is because I tried really hard not to plan too much for one session, because which many of you know is extremely hard for me. But because I think that the conversation is going to be where the really good stuff of all of this is going to be. So the reason I wanted to teach about like what is interpretive tefillah is because we've been doing it really hardcore for a year now. In our necessary shift to digital, we had to figure out what does prayer look like? What does prayer actually mean? How do we do this prayer thing when we can't have all of the staples that we've become used to? And so for this session, I want to focus on that big question: what is prayer? What is the experience of prayer? What is the ideal worship experience? And I'm going to make a distinction between prayer as like a unit into itself, a small unit, and then worship is a bunch of prayers put together. However you want to make that distinction for yourself. And so today we're going to focus on that question: what is prayer? What is worship? And then next week we'll start going into how do you make that interpretive? How do you use all the toys and tools of our age in order to build that experience? And then maybe we might even get to a third session of how do we, all of us, create that for ourselves and create that for our community. Cool. Questions, comments, ponderings on all of that? Awesome. That was like a really quick roadmap. So the very first question is, what is prayer? And you can interpret this question in any way, but especially thinking of what is the purpose of prayer, what is the form of prayer, what is the source of prayer, the direction of prayer, what's the occasion of prayer, all of these questions for all of us. What is prayer? None of these questions are rhetorical. Vicki.
To me, prayer is a form of communication at a higher level than ordinary conversations.
Great. And I'm going to take notes and be able to send all of this to all of us afterwards too. Great. Higher level. Great. Al.
I think prayer is any communication we have with God, whether it be in the form of words or our actions.
Nice. Very Heschelian of you. Great. And not just responding to me, responding to each other. How does all of that feel too? Dick, I saw your hand.
Yeah, here, Google says prayer is a noun, a solemn request for help or expression of thanks addressed to God or an object of worship. Or you can say it's an earnest hope or wish.
What, Dick, was that to God or an object of worship?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand you, Shelley.
I didn't understand the last part you said. It was asking to God or an object of worship.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
A solemn request for help or expression of thanks addressed to God or an object of worship.
Thank you.
That last phrase, now that one, that'll raise some controversy.
Yeah. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah. Well, that's the Google dictionary. Worth it to pay for it.
So let's keep going. Let's stay on this purpose track. What is the purpose of prayer? So we've had communication, a request, an expression of gratitude. What else is the purpose of prayer? Alon, yeah.
I struggle with this because to me, spirituality always comes into it, but I don't ever feel as though I'm particularly spiritual. But I think it's a connection with something bigger and greater than myself.
Nice.
And I can't say it's God. You know, when I'm in the mountains or by the ocean, it's like I could say a prayer,
Yes.
you know, of appreciation or something, but I'm not sure if it's to God.
Nice. So it's not necessarily, when we're talking about form, it could be an experience. It could be an exaltation, words. It could be something else entirely. Great. Barry.
In some religions, it's used as a mission of a method of submission. It's especially true in Islam.
Nice. Right. Again, cluing in on that hierarchy, something bigger, something higher than ourselves. Great. Shelley.
Yeah, I like what Alon said, because I know that, and I'm sure everybody has had that feeling when you've been somewhere where the vista is so overpowering. So I don't feel I'm sending up a prayer. I am just, it's an appreciation of all that has been given to us, that I am able to stand there and bring it into my, I can't explain it exactly, but I feel like it is so spiritual and I am at a higher level than I have ever been. I don't know.
Oh, so a heightening of self.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's prayer or not.
If you say it is, then it counts. Aline, I see your hand.
I was connecting also with what Alon and Shelley were saying. I was thinking about, I think it also can be very humbling. Like, hey, it's really far from all about me. I am a tiny grain of sand in this larger world. And in terms of prayer book prayer, or the structured prayer that are in our secret dream, sometimes to me that purpose also feels like I am in some form or another reciting the same words potentially as Jewish people across the entire world who are worshiping, and also the same words in one way or another as ancestors who go way back. So to me, it's also an enormous unifier of those who came before me and those who are here with me now, and hopefully those who come after me.
Nice. So a place in a chain, a unifier, being part of a larger tradition. Excellent. Eileen.
Yeah, my feeling is it's more of an appreciation of life, thanking God. That's the way I feel.
Nice. Thanking God. Excellent. And what about, we've touched a little bit on this. What about the source of prayer? Where does prayer come from? So Aline, you've mentioned the prayer book already. Is that the only place we get prayer? Ellen?
From within.
Right.
Any particular place within, right? Like, is it a heart experience? Is it a brain experience? Is it a soul experience? Is it something else?
I think it's a combination, very honestly. You know, there's some times where you just feel that, you know, you're praying for someone or to some, you know, to a higher being, and hopefully that gives you the feeling that you've accomplished your thoughts better.
Great. Shelley and then Alon.
Okay.
And Karen and Joanne, you can speak up whenever you want. I just can't see your hands, so up to you.
Okay. Is prayer something that comes naturally, or is it something that needs to be taught?
Nice. Nature versus nurture. I do not have the answer for that.
Oh.
Alana and then Aline.
I think it comes from within, but when you ask that, my mind went to our senses. Our hearing senses, our sight, because some people don't have what I have. I mean, I have my senses, but if you take a blind person or a person who's deaf, I think that they may experience it in a different way because of their heightened senses in different areas. So I think it comes from their senses also.
Gotcha.
You go to the ocean, you smell the ocean water. I mean, you go, you see the sunset and you see, so I think it has something to do with that. And then it comes from within.
Great. Thank you. Aline.
I think also it can come from a place of desperation and pain. I had an experience last week, actually. My sister and I, within a couple of days, both observed a significant cognitive change in our mother. And I found myself kind of shouting out, "Okay, God, we might need your help here." Kind of, and there was just those few words that it made me feel less alone. I don't know how else to say it, and it's really rare for me to shout out. It was helpful. It kind of just brought me to a place where I was more settled.
So I'm gonna also put that down as maybe like a catharsis, like an expression to bring healing, to bring not necessarily to ask for healing, but an expression that results in a personal healing, in that answering of a personal need.
Right, and maybe that thing about petitionary prayer of, hey, I'm in pain here, can you help a little bit? Even though I don't expect that God is going to come in and do anything, but it feels better to just kind of be in that conversation.
Nice. Yeah, great. Eileen and then Shelley, I thought I saw your hand too.
No.
It was Vicky. Never mind. Eileen and then Vicky.
Yeah, I think that what Elaine says is very true. I think that a lot of times we say things to God thinking out loud or in silence about our feelings. Why is this happening, and how can you help? And then you do appreciate being able to say what's on your mind out loud in a prayer. To me, that's the important thing.
Nice. Yeah. Without like the social pressures of asking these really difficult questions.
Right.
Yes.
Nice. Vicky.
Yeah, I was thinking of that line in our book where it says, pray as if everything depended on God, act as if everything depended on you.
Page 75.
I mean, when my students said, I'm going to pray that the test is easy, I always would throw that line at them, pray as if everything depended on God, but act as if everything depends on you. It's so true. I mean, you pray, but you've got to sometimes do more than just pray from your heart. You've got to let your hands and your mind and everything else take hold of what it is you're praying for. Now, that's not always possible, but with the kids with a test, if they study hard, they're helping God with it. It's sort of a partnership, me and God. Hi, God, help me. God says, do it yourself a little bit, kid.
It's the Nacho moment. God can't do anything until you take a step into the water, or even more than a few steps, and it comes ad nafesh, right up until the point that you drown, and that's when God comes in. Great. I think we've gotten all of them. Purpose, form, source, direction, occasion. Any other thoughts on what is prayer? Great. We've got a great list. And I think as you've experienced it, it's not, there's no good definition of it, despite what Google says. There's no good way to summarize it all, especially because it's such a personal thing. It's such an internal thing. Despite the external components of it, it has such an internal effect. So it's really hard to put your finger on what is prayer. And then when we're talking about how do we create prayer experiences, it becomes even harder, because now you have two things that are undefined instead of just one thing that's undefined. But of course, throughout our history, and especially as that spirituality component of an everyday life, the more modern we get, the harder that spirituality is to talk about, to find, to acknowledge. As that has happened throughout time, it's been harder to define what prayer is, and more theologians, more ritualists have tried to define it to help us find this elusive experience. So I'm going to introduce two, probably not introduce, but bring in two Jewish ritualists, liturgists, scholars who of very high ranking, that have taken it upon themselves to try to figure out what is this prayer? What's the experience that we're looking for, and how do we get there? So the first one that we're going to look at is Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Oh.
We're familiar with him in a lot of different situations, mostly because of his role in the civil rights movement, his partnership with Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and his statement of when he was marching with Dr. King, he felt as if he was praying with his feet. He had that great phrase. Now, he goes on for a lot longer in that speech, but that phrase, praying with his feet, is something that we as a Reform movement have kind of taken up and started to really think about, well, what does that prayer as action really look like? What does praying with our feet really mean? But even before he had that experience, he was already wrestling with what is prayer and what is worship, an experience of lots of prayers put together. So he has this is pieces of a much larger writing, again, talking about what is prayer, what is worship. Al Slutsky, will you read this for us?
Public worship is an act of the highest importance. However, it tends in our days to become a spectacle in which the congregation remains passive, inert spectators. But prayer is action. It requires complete mobilization of heart, mind, and soul. What is the worth of attending public worship when mind and soul are not involved? Renewal of liturgy involves renewal of prayer. Prayer serves many aims. It serves to save the inward life from oblivion. It serves to alleviate anguish. It serves to partake of God's mysterious grace and guidance. Yet ultimately, prayer must not be experienced as an act for the sake of something else. We pray in order to pray. Prayer is a perspective from which to behold, from which to respond to the challenges we face. Man in prayer does not seek to impose his will upon God. He seeks to impose God's will and mercy upon himself. Prayer is necessary to make us aware of our failures, backsliding, transgressions, sins. Prayer is more than paying attention to the holy. Prayer comes about as an event. It consists of two inner acts, an act of turning and an act of direction. I leave the world behind as well as all interests of the self. Divested of all concerns, I am overwhelmed by only one desire, to place my heart upon the altar of God. To pray is to open a door where both God and soul may enter. Prayer is arrival for him and for us. To pray is to overcome distance, to shatter screens, to render obliquities straight, to heal the break between God and the world. A dreadful oblivion prevails in the world. The world has gotten what it means to be human. The gap is widening, the abyss is within the self.
Thank you. I'm going to leave this here for one more second, let you process. He said a lot in not so many words. And then the question becomes, what do you make of Rabbi Heschel's perspective on prayer? Agree? Disagree? Affirmed? Surprised?
Yeah.
Yeah, Shelley?
Oh, yeah. I mean, where he says prayer, I mean, unless I misread it, prayer is to alleviate, and then prayer is to be within the community to pray.
He says prayer serves to alleviate anguish.
Yeah.
He says
he doesn't mention community, but what I read was you should be in, I guess, in temple or in a place where you should all pray together. Isn't there something about that in there?
Well, it's fascinating that that's what you're hearing, because he never actually talks about other people in prayer. He talks about himself and God in prayer.
Yeah.
And that you're hearing him talk about a communal experience and not an individual experience.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Which is
maybe because I'm still visualizing him walking with the Torah with across that bridge where they're all singing and in prayer.
Yeah, so he's got that very famous picture of him and Martin Luther King and lots of other Black community leaders and Jewish community leaders walking across is it the Birmingham Bridge?
Yes, carrying the Torah. Mm-hmm.
Right, and you know, he's got that very classic Jewish look, the long beard, the dark jacket, he's carrying the Torah, and to have that be the picture of prayer, of when he talks about prayer is both turning and direction, it makes me think of velocity, right? It's both speed and direction. You need to have two components in order to be a full experience. You need to know where you're going and how fast you want to get there. But I also love his statement that we pray in order to pray.
Yes.
Because I think even for those who are most experienced at prayer, it's a hard thing to do. And we're constantly, it's one of those things that we always want to get better at, because we also always feel insufficient at. How are we ever going to express our fullest inner desires? How are we ever really going to communicate with God, who's so far beyond us? We pray in order to pray because we're praying for the skill of prayer. We're praying for the habit of prayer, but we're also praying because we don't know really how to pray. We're not experts at prayer. None of us are. And so to be able to, for him who is so practiced at prayer, who's so studied at prayer, for even him to acknowledge that we're asking for that ability to pray, That's a big statement, I think.
Yes.
Alon, I see you reacting. Reactions are good.
You know what? I really need to not be so reactive, or at least to be like Karen and Joanne. I have a hard time with that concept, that it is a skill that we are developing, getting better at and stuff, because it makes me feel, it pressures me. It puts a pressure on me that, oh my God, I have to do it in a certain way, or I have to reach excellence. Well, that's not what I want from that. I don't want it to have to be work.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah, and it's great that you use that word, because the original form of prayer, back in Torah days, in Holy Temple in Jerusalem days, that original form of prayer was sacrifice.
Mhm.
And what's the Hebrew word for sacrifice for that version of prayer? Avodah, which now we take as meaning work. It's how we describe business, and like the daily grind of work. There is another way to describe sacrifice, and that's the noun of sacrifice is korban, which means to get closer to. Karov means to actually like approach something. And in the concept that prayer is both, it is partially work, it's partially developing the habit and the skill and the nurture component of it, but it's also partially the spontaneous, and the unexpected prayer that just kind of has to come out and has to be experienced. And what is the turning and what is the direction? Turning is an act. Direction is just where you happen to be after you turn, right? It is both the ritual and the spontaneous, and put together. Maybe then you start to create a full prayer life. I don't know. Eileen, I thought I saw that you were going to respond to something, and then I see Al's hand.
Well, I was just going to say that I feel that there's two kinds of prayers for me. In joining with others in the temple or Zoom or whatever, and then the private moments where you want to show appreciation or whatever need you need, but there's definitely can't be just one type of prayer as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and even to create private moments within the communal, and then also to create communal moments within the private.
Right.
They're not two separate kinds of prayer. They're very much overlapping and integrated in each other. Nice. Alan.
Listening to what Elon had to say, I appreciate what she says, because I don't want my prayer or my worship to be judged. I don't want to feel that I'm inadequate because I'm not praying like somebody else might. And my prayer is very personal to me. And so I don't like the concept of I've got to get better at it. I'm working at a level that I feel comfortable with, and I feel like I'm communicating as best I can with God. I don't want to be judged by others.
Yeah, and we often, when we talk about prayer as a habit, we talk about prayer as a practice, right? If you're always practicing prayer, you've never quite reached the goal of prayer. You're always practicing, you're always growing, you're always kind of working out the kinks of prayer. But I think a lot about that feeling of inadequacy, or the feeling of being or of doing the judging when being in those moments of communal prayer. And a lot of you know that my primary Jewish experience growing up was a camp experience, right? I grew up sitting on the hill, listening to the guitar, singing the Debbie Friedman songs, And then I get to HUC, to rabbinical school, and people's the Jewish experience that they were bringing into rabbinical school was so different from mine. It came from so many different places, and there were people who came from much more traditional observant homes. And our first prayer experience was a morning service, and led by some upperclassmen who were in Israel to help us really find our way around Jerusalem and learn how to pay rent and things like that. And we had a Torah service that people had different habits than I did, and they looked so into it. They looked really passionate about the way that they prayed. They had more ritual items than I did. They would wrap tefillin. They had their own personal talit. We would say the Amidan, whereas I would be standing and pretty much distracted by everything around me. They would be putting their talit up on their head and having a very personal prayer moment. And I'm sitting there going, is this how I'm supposed to be praying? Is this what rabbinical school is expecting of me when I pray? Right? It's hard when you're in that communal situation to not have those social pressures, because that's also very distinctly human. And Al, like you were saying, to never really know what other people are seeing of us and how we're seeing other people in those prayer experiences, because they really are so individualized. And I don't know if someone who wraps tefillin does it because they feel like they have to, because they feel like they get meaning out of it, because it's just the habit that they have, and it would feel weird if they didn't. I don't know about that. All I know is my experience of what they're doing and how it echoes back to me to inform my own experience. And that can be a really hard thing to be in a multivocal prayer experience where everyone has their own practice. No one is judged for having that practice, and everyone is equally on the same spiritual plane. That's probably not the right phrase for it, but equally celebrated for their personal prayer practice. Al, I saw you unmute. Is there something to respond to that?
No, I'm good.
Great. Other Alan, and then Ali.
Well, this reminds me when I was being taught how to pray in a more orthodox congregation, there's definitely guilt, shame. If you're a slow learner and couldn't really keep up or know what page they had gone to because nobody was announcing pages, or didn't shechel properly, and it's just a lot of guilt attached to it.
Yeah, and whether it's intentional guilt or unintentional guilt, right? Like in our clergy conversations a lot when we're talking about Shabbat and other worship experiences, we go, do we really need to announce this page? Page announcements can feel like they're an interruption to a flow, and they also help people stay with the flow. So like, what's the priority in there? And us not announcing the page isn't intended as a way to make people feel like they have no idea how to pray or how to be in a worship experience. But a lot of times it can be an unintentional consequence. And it's hard to think about all of those components of, when we're creating an experience for everyone, what actually is everyone's experience in that. Aline, and then Alon.
So your comment totally takes me in a different place as to what I wanted to say. When my father passed away, we were very involved in a conservative congregation, and I did go to Minyan every day for the 11 months, as was the practice in our congregation for many who had lost a parent. And because I did not go to Hebrew school as a child, I just went to Sunday school, my Hebrew reading is slow. And I went to that service every single day for 11 months. They did not announce pages. It's very fast, It's just boom, 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 boom. And in 11 months, I still couldn't keep up. And I think there's something, I mean, I was there because the ritual was, for me, healing and part of the community I was part of at that time. But I think there is something about welcoming all levels into the congregation, all visitors into the congregation. And when we assume that people know where we are in the prayer, then we are in some way saying, you're kind of part of the fold because you know it, or you're not. And so I just was thinking about making the prayer should be accessible for anybody who walks in the door.
Yeah, it's one of those unspoken agreements of that. This is how we know if you're in the tent or not in the tent.
Right.
And you never really know how someone is feeling that and how someone is deciding where their place is in the community unless you ask them, because I'm going to guess that no one asked you, how are you feeling with our prayer book? Are you familiar with our, right?
I went and I said, please, I don't do this as fast as everybody else in here, because a lot of them were daily goers for 20 years. Please, I need to know what page we're on. And I was heard, but the decision was that it was a fast service and that was the way it was going to be. And they appreciated it. But I do think there is something for the larger picture. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Alon. And then Ellen.
I once went to a service at a Reformed congregation here in this area, and the rabbi did the Kaddish so fast. I went, what is going on here? I mean, I felt so disrespectful. So I agree with Aileen. I mean, I need things to be slowed down because I need to be able to process it. So, but my question is, Rabbi, did you learn prayer, how to pray in rabbinical school?
It's a really good question, because we didn't have a class on how to pray. We had many classes on liturgy and on holidays and ritual creation, but no one ever took us aside and said, this is how we pray. What we did have was daily services that were mostly optional. There were one service a week was not optional. And if you wanted to learn how to pray, you had to opt into the experience and struggle with the experience on your own. And there were some reflection groups and things like that to help you kind of figure out what your experience was, but it wasn't a requirement to go to worship. It wasn't a requirement to join those reflection groups. So it was a part of the rabbinical school curriculum, but not the highlights. Definitely not the core of the curriculum either. Ellen.
Well, I may be coming from a different place. Alan obviously had experience as a kid with Orthodox, and in our married life, I guess in my earlier life, belonged to a conservative synagogue, and our kids went to Reconstruction, and now, of course, we're in the Reform, and I'm grateful for that. I think that what I have found, I was not at Sunday school. I was not part of the Hebrew school. It was just not the thing when I was growing up for a girl to be part of that. But what I have found over the years, excuse me, is that as we have gone into other temples, be it for a bar bat mitzvah or for whatever reason, wedding situation, I have many times felt growing up that I did not belong. There was that stare that was coming from the bima at others in the audience, including I felt us, that we were not doing what they were doing. We didn't understand what they were doing. We weren't going as fast as they were going. And I, for one, could not read anything, and the pages weren't given. And when we stepped into the reform, and you had a book that was transliterated so that I could feel religious in my own way, that was like a blessing. It was something that allowed me to have that prayer of whatever anybody else was doing in their way. I could, whether I was interpreting what it meant while you were reading the Hebrew, or I was learning how to read along with the Hebrew, that meant so much more. And I think prayer became a bigger part of it.
Nice. So there's also, just as much as walking into a strange prayer experience can feel ostracizing, there's also different tools that communities can provide that help to feel connecting and help to make that that feeling of being outside, of being different, less extreme. So we've done a lot of talking about what makes us feel uncomfortable in worship experiences. What about if you had to ignore the prayer book completely, ignore pre-written liturgy? If you had to create the perfect worship experience, what would you be sure to include? Vicki and then Alan.
Music and a time for silent prayer.
Nice. Great. Alan.
I think that graphic display pictures, one of the things a number of years ago, I attended some sessions with the reform movement about going to online service or technologically orientated services. And one of the things was about having individual members of a congregation or the leaders to pick out visuals that would be shown on screens during services. That caused me to begin to do it myself in my head and kind of develop pictures for different parts of the service in that. And I really think that that's very meaningful. It gives you a different feel.
Nice. And it goes back to Alon's comment of that sensory experience to use all of those senses. Great. What else would we include in a perfect worship experience or a near perfect worship experience? I don't know if we could ever get to actual perfect. Aline.
I mean, I've talked a lot. I want to be sure if anybody else wants to say something. So
Go for it.
Okay. I hope for some readings that make me think and make me feel. I also love some words from the prayer leader, from the rabbi or whoever leading the service, that make me think, that help reflect. But I also know that for me as personally, as an individual, I need to know that there are some pieces of the service that are sacred, that don't change, something that I can, that is predictable for me. So for example, Friday night, I had to put myself in a different place. This is Purim, this is a different service, but I also was able to say to myself, there's going to be a Shema. There are parts of this that I can absolutely count on as being predictable. So that to me is important.
Nice. And I also recognize that shift in language that you were doing. We would call those sacred cows, things that don't change. And the shift in language from things that are the same versus things that are predictable, and how those might be equal terms, and they might be slightly different terms also. Things that are the same versus things that are predictable. So both Tobins, you can decide who goes first.
I was saying one word: participation. I think that's an important part of the service that should be in there.
Nice, great. Alan.
Maybe you.
Yeah. I don't
Yes, Alan Tobin.
know. I'm too old to remember what I was going to say that long. Well, I think what I was going to mention is that Aileen mentioned back there, you know, about the form, the actual printed service and that. And for me, the more English, the more, I think the idea that the majority of us really understand what we're saying when the Hebrew is being read to us or when we're asked to read the Hebrew is a stretch. And that the English is very important to me.
Awesome. So I'm going to call that vernacular, our spoken language. That could change depending on where we are and who we're with. But having something that is easily understandable without needing an extra translation to it adds an extra layer to the experience. Awesome. Keep all of this in mind. Because as we're about to wrap up, I want to introduce our second scholar. This is Rabbi Larry Hoffman. He was one of my liturgy professors at Hebrew Union College and is really known as the liturgy, not just in the Reform world, but in the Jewish world at large. He is an expert on not just history and the words of liturgy, how the liturgy has developed and all of the external influences of liturgy, but also how to change liturgy into prayer and prayer into worship. He is an expert on the experience and not just the words of the tradition. So Hebrew Union College has been working on creating their own podcasts using all of the great scholarship with amongst the 4 campuses. And Dr. Joshua Hollow is one of the deans on the LA campus and goes around kind of interviewing a lot of the professors and other scholars of HUC. And he did a very long, really great interview with Rabbi Hoffman, of which I'm going to put the link to the written text, the transcript into the chat if you'd like to follow along. And we're just going to listen to the very beginning of it, because Larry Hoffman describes the worship experience as a sacred drama. And keep that phrase in mind, a sacred drama. And he's going to explain what that drama really is. So let me share my audio, computer audio. Thank you. All right.
Welcome to the College Commons Bully Pulpit Podcast.
Can you hear?
Torah with a point of view.
Okay.
Produced by the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, America's first Jewish institution of higher learning. My name is Joshua Holo, your host and Dean of the Jack H. Skirball campus in Los Angeles.
It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome my friend and colleague, Rabbi Larry Hoffman, who is the Barbara and Stephen Friedman Professor of Liturgy, Worship, and Ritual at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute in New York. Widely published, Professor Hoffman has received the National Jewish Book Award not once, but twice. And in 1994, he co-founded Synagogue 2000, which was a trans-denominational project to envision the ideal synagogue as, quote, a moral and spiritual center for the 21st century. Rabbi Hoffman, Larry, if I may, it's a pleasure to have you.
I'm so good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're one of the great voices on prayer in Judaism today, and so I want to ask you, as a person who sometimes confronts impediments of my own in prayer, I want to ask you your opinion about what, if you had to reduce it to a single cause, what is the greatest impediment to praying or to prayer today in Jewish life?
First of all, thanks for the compliment. I think about it all the time, of course. It seems to me, actually, first of all, it's not the greatest impediment, but people think it is. They think it's God. They say they don't believe in God. They don't think anybody's listening up there, and so what's the point of it all? But I think that's actually a mistake. I take them at their word, to be sure, but I think that's not the problem. The essential problem, I think, has to do with a misunderstanding of what prayer is in its form and the contract that we have between the people who are providing the prayer experience and people who are coming to it. I think of prayer as an art form. I think of it as the grand art form because it puts together music and drama and
it's almost
poetry.
Cinematic, right?
Yeah, it's fabulous when it's done right. Problem is, on our side, I'm talking now as a rabbi, and I think I speak for cantors as well. I don't mean to be just rabbis. All the people who are involved, it's an art form that we don't do very well. And there's nothing worse than an art form that's bad, you know? So that's our problem. But the problem of people coming is you don't appreciate an art form unless you suspend your disbelief. Do you go to the opera?
Of course. Who doesn't?
So did you ever go to the opera because you loved the story? No. Who believes that stuff, right? If I said to you, why don't you go, we're going to talk about a demon and a this and a that, you'd say, thank you, I got better things to do.
You go for the tenor and
You
the
go
soprano.
for the grandness of it all. I mean, Wagner had it right. It's a complete work of art. So I think of prayer as that sort of thing, a complete work of art. But you can only go if you suspend your disbelief. If I paid attention to the story, I wouldn't believe a word of it. But at the end of it, all that music and so on and so forth, I'm crying at the end of it because there's something about the human condition that gets touched. Prayer is an art form that touches the human condition. But you have to enter into it, suspend your disbelief.
More than that, you're saying that they have to be met halfway also by the artists, by the collaborative team that presents the prayer, not just from the Middle Ages and from antiquity, but also those who are the purveyors of it.
Yes, exactly.
The synagogue goer has to be met halfway by an excellent, artful.
Yes, it's a layered art form. It starts with the people who wrote the prayer book and gave you the music. That's the first level of art. Then it's the people who put it all together in the right prayer book and the right script. That's the second level of art. And then there are the people who do it. That's the third level. And the last level is the people who go and participate.
You started off by saying, you know, a person might suspect that the reason people feel an impediment to prayer is because of the articulation of a God that, if broken down intellectually, they would have to arrive at the conclusion that they don't, or many of them don't believe in. And you're saying, no, that's not the issue. Well, what about the argument that it's not belief or disbelief or agnosticism that impedes them? It's more affirmative than that. It's that God language, faith-styled words evoke notions of Christianity to them and feels off-putting in a much more affirmative way than mere agnosticism.
Well, there's something to that, but that has to do with the way a certain generation was raised. If you're over 45, let's say, you were raised largely in an ethnic Jewish environment, and you have a lot of baggage about the Christian environment around you, and you tend to associate a certain language as Christian. The fact of the matter is most of the Christian language started as Jewish language.
Right.
There's someone who talks about a game that Harvard football team plays against Ohio State or something like that, and they say, you know, they lost 55-0, but we've got all the good cheers. The problem is that the Christian community got all the good cheers, you know, so we now take the old Jewish language, but we say, oh no, it's Christian. Grace, that's not a Christian term, that's our term, you know. Theology generally, that's our term.
Right,
even the good news is Besorot Tovot. We had it first, so, you know, but we have to reclaim it. And here's why. If you can't say it, you don't know it. And we need a language that can say it or we don't know it.
And we have to speak it artfully is what you're saying.
Right.
You're saying you can't just drop a term. You can't just expect people to open up a machzor or a prayer book and engage.
That's right. People make the mistake of thinking that they don't know something or they don't want to believe something, they can't use the language. I'm saying if you use the language in the right environment, at that moment you believe it. I don't pray because I believe because I pray. It's an experience. After the fact, I can't believe I was crying in that opera. After the fact, I can't believe that I was moved to tears or joy in prayer. But
the way you're casting it, it's not even really about arriving at belief. It's about allowing yourself to be touched and therefore enriched, and that somehow you come out better than you entered.
Yeah, that's right. People think that ideas are what we make up, but that's not exactly true. Even in English, we say, it struck me. Mm-hmm. It came to me.
Right.
The great ideas then hit us. I liken ideas to gifts. You know, you wrap a gift, and when you're finished, what you discover is that the wrapping kind of impinges on what you put inside, and the wrapping doesn't quite look the same. I consider worship a wrapping. It's a wrapping of ideas, which are the gift. But the gift gets wrapped in worship, which is different than getting wrapped in an academic discourse. And it comes out differently.
It ends up being different by virtue.
It does, absolutely it does. Right, if you do it well.
So it's a heavy lift for both the synagogue goer and the team, the historical team, the actual team, the synagogue team.
When I was younger and I was a rabbinic student, I had this great teacher who was reputed to know absolutely everything, absolutely everything. And his name was Dr. Tepfer, Allah Shalom. He'd come from England, he had this British accent, so you could believe he knew everything.
You knew everything, right.
So at one point, I don't know why, I said to him I wanted to learn Yiddish. I think because I knew my grandmother spoke Yiddish and I'd forgotten it. And I wanted to learn it again. I said to him, can you teach me Yiddish? Since he knew everything. And he said to me, Yiddish, Hoffman? He said to me, you don't teach Yiddish, you just open your mouth and it comes out. Well, he was wrong, of course, but that's the attitude people have to prayer. You just open your mouth and it comes out. Right. But actually it doesn't. It's an art form and it takes the people who are involved, each at their own level, to come together and make it work in a group.
You know, you've reminded me of what I think is a myth about Winston Churchill, of course, who was known for his quips and his witticisms and his spontaneous wisdom.
I love Churchill, yeah.
Right, everyone loves Churchill. He's great to quote. The mystique about him was that he was so quick and so attuned that all of this came off the top of his head. And this may be equally apocryphal and mythical, but the myth is that in fact he would go home and practice his witticisms in front of the mirror, and all that which felt spontaneous and witty was in fact a practiced, highly developed art form. And you're saying that we have to not just receive the Siddur, but republish it, reimagine it, and reproduce it every time.
Not just the Siddur. First of all, about the art form, though, it's not just Churchill, it's every art form. Van Gogh writes to his brother, and I forget how long he says, but he says it took him 2 days or 5,000 strokes to get the right petal on the flower. Right, you know, right. He didn't just do it. Right. Nobody just does it. Maybe Mozart, they say Mozart could just write the music, but I'm not sure about that either. Anyway, back to the prayer book. I don't think the issue is so much the prayer book. I like to say the prayer book isn't really a book. It just looks like a book because it's got 2 covers on it. But actually, we were praying long before anything was written. So it's not just a book. I think of it as a script. It's an ongoing script. It's the master script of the Jewish people. And whenever you hold it in your hand, you're interpreting it. So what's really going on is you have a script, and if you don't have the right music, and you don't have the right environment, and you don't have the people sitting in the right way, and you don't have a connection between people, the script falls flat. We rabbis and cantors, we're like directors of this script. And when we do the script right, it's an art form that I call a great drama. But it's a drama and not to people, at people, but it involves everybody, you know?
So I want to now move.
All right, great. So there's Larry Hoffman. Prayer is this sacred drama, one in which the prayer book is only the black and white components that help to inform our worship experience, but they are not the worship experience on their own. And one of the things that I love about this concept of a sacred drama is it's not just about what's happening on the stage. That the thing that makes a worship experience different than going to the opera is the congregation is equally involved. They are both the spectators and the actors at the same time. And there's the directors, there's all the different scenery components, there's the music, there's the immersive experience. But the congregation has to be just as involved and has to be just as active in the experience as the people who are on the stage. So a little piece of, when you have some time to think about it, a little piece of homework. Think about a time in your life where prayer has felt like that sacred drama, like a meaningful, fully immersive experience. And try to figure out what made it feel like that great moment of prayer. It could look like anything. It could feel, sound, smell, taste, all of it like anything. It could come from the prayer book. It could come from nature. It could come from a life cycle experience. It could come from anything. But think about something that has felt like a meaningful prayer experience, something that might reach the level of a sacred drama, and try to figure out what are the components that went into it that helped make it like that. Cool. Easy enough homework assignment, of course. Any last thoughts before we wrap up? All
Wonderful
right.
program.
Thank you. Well, next week we'll go even deeper. We'll start talking about actual creation of worship experiences and include all of those sensory experiences that are both written into our tradition and that we can add on our own. And I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for learning with me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hi.
Thank you, Rabbi.